Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Bo again, and welcome to The Roads with Bo. This is episode 14 of The Roads Not Taken, and it is a weekly series where we go through the previous week's events, looking for unreported, underreported news or news that'll end up as context later. And then at the end, we go through some questions from y'all. Today is November 19th, 2023. We will start off with foreign policy. Okay, Swedish dock workers are refusing to unload Teslas from the docks. The action is being taken because Tesla reportedly refused to sign a collective wage agreement. In Sweden, I want to say like 9 out of 10 jobs are covered by these kinds of agreements. So what you're seeing is a lot of solidarity between workers, and it is spreading. My understanding is that postal carriers will stop delivering Tesla's mail tomorrow. Let's see. There are reports that Ukrainian Resistance is tainting food and drink inside Russian-occupied areas for stuff that is going to end up in Russian hands. I looked into this. I have found some evidence, but it not enough to say that it's like super widespread. However, when it comes to stuff like this, perception is what matters. And this news is spreading like wildfire through Russian channels. So whether or not it's true, that's one thing. But the Russian troops believe it's true. There is a tentative deal for a short pause in fighting and the release of some captives in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We'll wait and see how it plays out. Biden has again repeated his call for a two-state solution and put out an op-ed in the Washington Post, I think. It's worth reading, especially if you're interested in foreign policy, because you can look at some of the statements there and compare them to what state has done and has hinted at, and you can get a pretty clear picture of what U.S. policy is going to be like in the future if Biden has his way. Okay, moving on to U.S. news. The space laser lady threatened to start a new party. She also told the director of the FBI that she had posted some things on Twitter implying that he should be familiar with them because of that. And he said that he didn't spend much time on Twitter, at which point Green said, I'm sure you do, because the DHS organized with other offices and censored people like me. It is worth noting that the FBI director works for the FBI, which is part of DOJ, not DHS. A former Santos fundraiser entered a guilty plea in relation to impersonating a McCarthy aide, I believe. Or maybe it was impersonating McCarthy. Either way, it is another blow to any potential Santos defense. Hunter Biden's legal team is requesting permission to subpoena Trump and former Trump officials. The belief in what they're kind of moving for is they want to demonstrate that Trump pressured officials to engage in what could have been selective prosecution, is what they're angling for. Nikki Haley called for increasing the country's retirement age for younger people. Chip Roy asked his Republican colleagues in Congress to name, quote, one meaningful, significant thing the Republican majority has done. I don't think he got an answer. If the Democratic Party doesn't use this during the campaign. Okay. Allegations in a lawsuit against the Alabama Department of Corrections claim a guard encouraged inmates to kill another inmate who has previously organized strikes within the prison. I have a feeling that this is something the Department of Justice may eventually get involved in. Okay, moving on to cultural news. Truth Social has reportedly lost millions and may need to shut down. The exact amount is being reported differently by different outlets as far as how much has been lost, but tens of millions. I haven't been able to discern which one is accurate. A bunch of people on Twitter got mad about Target having a black Santa, like an item. It was like a black. Anyway, it turned into a big thing there for a while. More culture war stuff. So, environmental news. Extreme weather already cost the United States about $150 billion per year in damages, which means soon the U.S. government is going to have to choose between the cost of changing our infrastructure, transitioning, or continuing to pay massive amounts of money in damages. And I put this under oddities just because of the timing on it. But this is something I think should be a bigger story, because for those who are familiar with it, it's one of those things where it's kind of nice to see, but when you want to talk about something that's too little too late, this definitely applies. So, more than 100 years after the Houston riots, the U.S. Army has overturned the convictions of more than 100 black soldiers. The trial that occurred after the riot, it was the largest in U.S. military history. It resulted in 60 life sentences and 19 hangings. 13 of those were conducted at one time, and to this day, it is the most soldiers hanged at once at any time by the U.S. Army. And now those convictions have been overturned. The story that goes along with it it's one that's worth looking into. It sheds a whole lot of light on how things were back then. It's nice to see it changed, and I guess some of the descendants were present, and my understanding is that some of them may actually be entitled to some benefits through this. But it's just nice to see some stuff like this addressed, because anybody who ever actually looked into that story, I mean, everybody kind of walked away with the same, how did this happen kind of thing, even though it was 100 years ago. We know how it happened. Okay, moving on to the questions and answers. First, this episode was for Rosina. Okay. Something you often repeat is the idea that the best way to affect change is to begin at the local level. Something that's hard for me is choosing a thing that is big enough to start to affect change. Gotcha. You don't want to waste your time. I understand. You want to pick battles that are big enough to matter and small enough to win. At the same time, if you are just getting active and trying to get out there and volunteer or engage with different organizations, you want to start with something you like, something that you enjoy. Once you start doing it, and it could be anything, and it doesn't even have to be something that is totally in line with what you want to accomplish. One that I know that I've seen people do that has led them to definitely more advanced forms of activism was Habitat for Humanity, because they enjoyed it. And when you're doing something like that, you end up meeting other people, you find out about other causes, and eventually you find something that not only is effective and helps alleviate issues, but it's also where you need to be, in the sense of it's where you can do the most good, it's the most rewarding for you personally, and it doesn't feel like a drain. That's the important part. And the only way to find that out is to get out there. Pick something you like. Believe me, as you start doing it and start talking to people and finding out about other causes, you will end up in the position you need to be in. You just have to be, willing to follow that path when it comes. Okay. After the last few weeks, I understand why you've been covering the foreign policy parts instead of the moral arguments. It's exhausting. Got it. But my question is, why can't foreign policy be moral? It should be, right? I mean, it should be, you would think. Because it's about power. It doesn't have to be. But as long as nation states, the way we envision them today, as long as they exist the way they do, where everything is competitive rather than cooperative, foreign policy is going to only be about power. As long as we continue to allow our betters to divide us up by lines on a map or whatever, it's going to be like that. And if you want to understand it, you have to put the moral stuff aside, because governments aren't moral. Governments themselves, they're about governing. They're about power. So the foreign policy is going to reflect that. I know it's not good, but it's the way things are until we change them. How did the fundraiser do? We don't have the final numbers yet, because people were donating after the stream. But my guess is right around 10, somewhere between 9 and 11. Okay, and yeah, we're good. That is enough. This will be another year, I think, where we end up having to, we'll do all of the stuff we want to do. We'll ask them if they need anything else, and then we'll probably end up having to cut them a check too. Which is, that's the position we want to be in. So it went well. And, okay, and I'm supposed to end these, or at least mention a ranch story. So, actually, right after that stream, I walk outside, and there were a bunch of coyotes that you could hear throughout the night after the stream. And I walk outside, and I can see these eyes. It's dark, and I can see the eyes kind of glowing. And I'm sitting there, and I'm like, great. Generally speaking, this is not a super dangerous situation, but at the same time, I got a little nervous. And I'm sitting there looking at them, and I reach down real slow and get my flashlight, and I pull it up, and I shine it at them. I look at all those deer. Wasn't coyotes. The coyotes, I guess they ran by. It was a bunch of deer, and they were right outside. But yeah, it was a tense couple of seconds there. But yeah, that's all I've got for you right now. So that looks like it. So hopefully you have a little more context, a little more information, and having the right information will make all the difference. Y'all have a good night.